Assalamu alaikum. We stopped at, this is part 9. We stopped at page 17. We're now on page 18 of Professor Adam's edited version of his doctoral thesis of the origin of the Islam-based schools and the struggles of Muslims in Cape Town for education, 1860 to 1990. We're now at the point where coming of Sheikh Yusuf, Sheikh Abu Bakr, Sheikh Abu Bakr, Effendi in 1863. We covered Sheikh Yusuf coming, etc. Now, the Muslim craftsmen and women served the colonialists well. The Muslims, like many of the labor class, were illiterate of the Latin script, but had their own hybrid language, which was not understood by outsiders. And because they wrote in Arabic script, it was illegible to the outsiders of the faith, including the colonists. The freedom of faithful teaching, with no central control of curriculum or standard, caused some to follow the Imam strictly, while others were more flexible. The dress of the Muslims wore the robes, the scarves, the turbans, the conical hats, or turbans, further distinguished them from the other Cape peoples. The Muslims were a social order of their own, which created a threat and was at times offensive to the colonists, who regarded the wearing of robes only for the colonial elite. There the point is made. But what is not understood is that Muslims must actually dress in a manner which separates them, not separates, identifies them as Muslims in a community. The reason for that is so that people might come to Muslims in order to become Muslim, and also it restricts Muslims from behaving in a manner which is not appropriate. So it's a kind of a double-edged sword, in the sense that it controls you, and at the same time it distinguishes you from others, and that is basically a sunnah, because Nabi Muhammad Sallallahu said that when you want to wear a beard, make sure that you have a distinction between your mustache and your beard, because others wear full beard, so that people know that she's a Muslim. And this is a kind of a hope that we give the society and the peoples of the world, that they can come back to the original fitrah which Allah has created them, and come out of the forgetfulness of the Creator. So it's a kind of the way the Muslims wear. It's firstly to cover their bodies properly, because there's a hadith related to the fact that the one can put it this way. The understanding is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most shy. In other words, if one can put it in those English terms, but it doesn't mean in those particular. Therefore, He wants us to cover ourselves in public. We're not animals, We can't wear our private parts out, hanging out, etc., and thinking that we're dressed, yet we are undressed. So we're not animals. So covering the body with no shape showing, etc., is very important. It's like difficult now, because all the clothes are like so tight fitting. You think that people are wearing in pantyhose or something like that. So it's important for Muslims to distinguish themselves amongst the people, and make sure that they are ready to actually assist people who want to become Muslim. And that's the core feature of the dress of Muslims, to be the advert for the faith of the original faith, or the original faith of all people. To invite them, because they're in a state of forgetfulness. They forgot about where they come from. Allah has created them. They've become more egotistical and more believing in idols, and idolizing certain concepts, etc. So Muslims are there to remind people of the original self. That is the main thing, and that's why we have to distinguish ourselves from others. Okay, and so as we know that they didn't like the robes, where the Muslims wear the robes, because it's like that is only for the elite of the colonialists. The various imams and the specific followers often created conflict between Muslim congregations. Difference of opinion sometimes creates issues, and we know that in any community. So by 1891, there were 11,287 Muslim citizens were counted, but there were divisions within the ranks. Five different mosques were at that time built in the same Burkab area due to religious differences, and Dr. Ahmad David actually carries that in his book, The Mosques of the Burkab. But you'll see later how beneficial it was, even though it started off with differences between Muslims. It became our protection. The different masajid became a protection for us. Alhamdulillah. In 1891, in the Quran, Allah says Allah can change your bad things into good. Allah can swap it around. So we don't really know. That doesn't mean we're going to do bad and think that Allah's going to switch it over to good. No, 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 no. Not like that. Sometimes we do something bad, but we don't realize it. We don't realize it. And then it brings us closer to Allah. So five different mosques were at that time built in the same Burkab area due to religious differences. A conflict at the Palm Tree Mosque, which is in Long Street, was symptomatic of the inability of the Muslim leadership to deal with demands of the fast-growing heterogeneous Muslim community of the Cape at the time. Cohesion became more fragile, with cultural differences creeping in with new conversions to Islam and intermarriages between various cultures and traditions. Assimilation, modification to conventions, and even in beliefs were inevitable within this heterogeneous Cape Muslim community. It's not something which is unique to the Muslim community. It's just the way where people are. There will be differences, and that's the challenge of us that we need to be quite aware of and how to deal with it. So, various cultures and beliefs. I'm trying not to put my head so down, otherwise you look at my head or the top of my head all the time. So I don't have a stand, but I also don't want to push the book in the midst of the camera. So okay, let's see what I can do in this case. Okay. Now assimilation, modification to convention, and even in beliefs were inevitable within the heterogeneous Cape Muslim community. It is these differences that prompted Mr. Maidin to seek help from the British government. The British Empire and the Ottoman Empire had signed the Treaty of Paris in 1856 to ensure that the help of each other's subjects, should they reside in the other's empire. You see, there's the next protection of the Muslims in the Cape. Firstly, let me remind us, was the Dutch in 1658 who promulgated the placard which says nobody must disturb the Muslims. The next one was the Ratib, where Bordeaux represented the Muslims in Parliament. And now the existing treaty between the Ottoman Empire and the British Empire, which asks each of them to actually protect the other's subjects. My twin daughter is, well, not my twin daughter, my granddaughter is waking up. I think my voice is a little bit too harsh today. To ensure help of each other's subjects should they reside in the other's empire. This treaty was the result of the two assisting each other in the Crimean War in 1854. They both assisted each other in the Crimean War in 1854, not in South Africa, in another part of Europe. The earnest young men of the Turkish Ottoman Empire regarded their Sultan, their leader, as the Khalif, the supreme commander of all the Muslims in the world. You see, the Turkish were very confident people. The treaty allowed the domain of the young Sultan Abdulaziz to be admitted into the public law and system of Europe. The sense of prepared adaptation perhaps made Effendi see himself as an agent in the reform of the Cape. It was the job of the young Sheikh Abu Bakr Effendi to reconcile the people and synthesized the theological order at the Cape. The diplomatic, sorry for the tissues at the back, in the background, that's my wife and breakfast, etc. But it's part of the liveliness of the video. Okay. Abu Bakr intended to reconcile the people and to synthesize the theological order at the Cape. The diplomatic process to get Sheikh Effendi to the Cape gave Islam at the Cape a statutory recognition, very important. The moment the two empires agree to bring Sheikh Abu Bakr Effendi to Cape Town, it becomes statutory, it becomes law that this particular Sheikh is going to come and adjudicate to the Muslims in the Cape. Abu Bakr was an Islamic knowledgeable and was from a distinguished family who had a direct lineage from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was from Kurdistan in 1835, a northern province of modern Iraq. He was the one who carried the petition from the Kurdish people to the Sultan asking for assistance for the desperate, impoverished situation far from the capital of Turkey. His petition led to him being considered for the Cape. You can see they're very strong people, and I've met the Turkish in Makkah. They're very strong people, and it's so interesting that they're still in charge of Turkey. And, most of the other places were taken over. Even Turkey was taken over, but not taken over entirely. They influenced Ataturk to become more Western. But they didn't actually conquer Turkish, because Turkish army is like really immense army. And the people in actual fact are very, very self-motivated, very strong-willed people. And that explains why they could in actual fact stop the coup when the army wanted to take over, and the President Erdogan just basically told the people, leave your homes and stop them. And they just walked into the streets, pulled the soldiers out of the tanks, smacked them, and just stopped the coup. And that is a decisive kind of people. And so you must remember then that there's a lot of people that are descendants of the Effendis, and you can see they look Turkish, alhamdulillah, in the Cape. And so there are people, descendants of Tuan Guru and other friends of Allah, awliya as they call them, the saints that are lying here. They have lots of descendants from Muslims who woke up, are directly descendants from these saints and from these sheikhs, etc., that came here. And so this narrative of Burqa being descendants of a slave community is obviously an attempt to destabilize Muslim self-esteem. There's still a lady who is a direct descendant of Tuan Guru, and she is in actual fact staying in Torp Street. She is 96 years old. Haji Abdiata Costa. And so they are direct descendants of these Tuangs, basically the saints, and that are lying all over Cape Town. And we will later on touch on the power of these saints that still exists today, even in the time of death. They still have an enormous amount of power that emanates from the graveyard. We'll talk about that later. So it is their differences that prompted Mr. Maydeen to seek help from the British government. So now, the treaty also opened the door for the westernization, right? For the westernization of Muslims in Europe or any other colonial colony. The treaty allowed the domain of the young Sultan, Abdul Aziz, to be admitted into the public law and the system of Europe. This sense of prepared adaptation perhaps made Effendi see himself as an agent in the reform of the Cape. It was the job of the young Sheikh to reconcile the people and to synthesize the theological order at the Cape. The diplomatic process to get Sheikh Effendi to the Cape gave Islam at the Cape a statutory recognition. Abu Bakr was an Islamic scholar, and we read that already in October. His petition in October 1861, he was sent to London with a passport from His Majesty Imperial Sultan, and then to the Cape. The Sheikh was instructed by the Turkish Sultan to be the Cape's Muslims professor of theology and judge of Islamic law, a mufti. He had to teach the Hanafi school of thought, which is an imam, the Hanafi imam, who basically deals with fiqh, which is the advice on how to pray and what to do in your prayers, etc., and how to particularly perform your religious rites, rites. And then Imam Shafi is another person who also but they both use hadith in order to extract what is more comfortable for the people to pray. Like the one would say, if a woman touches you accidentally, then your wudu is broken. Another one say, no, it is not intentional, so your wudu is still okay. And so you see, you can apply it in terms of where you are. If you're going to take a wudu to pray, according to the one imam, that says if a woman touches you by accident, then you're going to break a wudu. Then in the tawaf, you're going to have a problem around the Kaaba. If somebody touches you, then you're going to have to break your tawaf, and that's not going to be comfortable. So then you intend to take wudu the other imam's style, a way that says that if a woman touches you by accident, it doesn't break your wudu. So it's all about your intention. What is your niyyah? And Nabi Muhammad is related to it, said that your actions are judged by its intentions. So even if you look at modern kind of psychology or modern kind of self-motivation, they tell you it is your intention that determines your life. And so the Quran has been, and the hadith and the fiqh, which is the guidance for Islamic practice, it's quite clear. It's your niyyah that's important. Allah is in charge of your niyyah, and when you make a niyyah intention, then the malaikas will assist you, or they will remove themselves from you in terms of the shaitan will come in order to assist you, whatever, if it's a negative thought. So we need to be clear about what is our intention, because we're not just material people, animal descendants, because there's another kind of concoction that the Western world has been bringing into the education, that we are descendants of apes, which even some Islamic scholars tend to think that this is a reality, which I don't know how that can happen, but okay, be that as it may. So almost they say, in other words, you are responsible for your own actions and your intentions and what you are doing, so be careful. Okay, so he was a mufti. He had to teach the Hanafi school of thought. According to the Sultan, the Hanafi school of thought is the easiest and most appropriate for the Cape. And the Ottoman Empire finance is coming. So he was actually paid by the Ottoman Empire to come here. His monthly salary and the needed publication of his task at the Cape, everything was financed by the Sultan. The Sultan of Turkey thus financed the Islamic education at the Cape. Sheikh Abu Bakr Effendi served both the Turkish and the British Empire. The British welcomed the Sheikh's arrival because they feared the Khalifa display or the Ratib were not able to deal with the Islamic religious disputes. They feared the Khalifa display. And they believed that the Sheikhs here and the Imams, the leaders, were not able to deal with this Islamic religious disputes. So they welcomed the Sheikhs to come, because they had these two fears. Okay, the one is the Khalifa, which is the Ratib, where they chop with it. And the other one was to settle his disputes, which they are not able to do. The Sheikh was sent to the Cape because he had a proficiency in English. So there's a very important thing. The Sheikh was very intelligent in the sense that he was a language man. The Sheikh found a mix of religious practices within diverse cultural Cape Muslim community. The Rabal did not anticipate that to bring a Hanafi Sheikh into the majority of Islamic Shafi'i school of thought practices would create more problems in the Cape. Now, that's an interesting thing. They brought the Sheikh, didn't realize it's a difference between Hanafi and Shafi'i madhab, in other words, thinking perceptions and understanding of the fiqh. And so this created other problems. Okay. So the Cape government's sanction of Islamic education at the Cape was unique. And that's a very interesting point. The Cape government sanction of Islamic education at the Cape was unique in that other British colonies that support other British colonies did not support Islamic education. In actual fact, in other British colonies, state support for Islamic education was discouraged for fear of uprising against the British government, especially where the Muslims were in the majority. The other British colonies believed that too much Islamic education might give rise to anti-imperial fanaticism or Mahdiism. The other colonies encouraged Western education to create an influential class of Muslims that will be culturally British or Western and morally Muslim for continuance of the Western influence over time. And that's what we have today. Okay. This would reduce anti-colonial uprisings due to the internal westernized Muslims class reluctance. And that's why we have today. You have a kind of a reluctance. You get the academia that are westernized through the educational styles, etc., where they were. And then if there's any particular issues from the Imam side, etc., then there's always this kind of controversy between the leadership, wanting leadership, the academics feel that they should be the leaders and the Imams are getting more particular support, etc., and the one criticizes the other, whatever the case might be. The point is that was the aim of the British, is to create an educational in which you have a double standard kind of Muslim, okay? The one that is culturally British and Western, but morally Muslim, so it's a kind of double kind of life that they lead. And this is to reduce an anti-colonial uprising due to the fact that there are internal westernized Muslims class that will be reluctant because they got both sides. So it's understand that because they make sure that the funding is there for the academia, and so they're not going to be hassling that side, but they're doing Islamic stuff with me. So it's going to be difficult for them because they want their bread buttered on both sides. It's very difficult, but I understand this whole thing about. But that's the trick. If they understand the trick, then they can use that particular criteria that they know and turn it around in order to benefit everybody. So the Cape British government, to the Cape British government, the freedom and support of Islamic education posed no threat because the Cape Muslims were insignificantly small in their calculation to pose a threat to the British government. The Cape Muslims were thus not a political threat to the British government. The Cape Muslims were thus not a political threat to the British government. Okay, Sheikh Abu Bakr Effendi was the first and the last to be paid by the Turkish government to establish and teach Islam at the Cape. The letter which appointed him was specific, quote, the teaching of Muslim youth of the Cape, the principles of Islamism, 15 July 1862. And the scholar is Hansat, 1893. The appointment letter was issued by Lord Russell to the Duke of Newcastle, Secretary of State for Colonists, who in turn advised the Cape Governor, Sir Philip Woodhouse. Newcastle sought the governor's protection for the Sheikh Effendi so that he can carry out his mission. The Sheikh had a flair for languages. He was skilled in Turkish, Arabic, Persian, French, and English, according to Ahmad David. The Sheikh then mastered the Cape Dutch, which is the Kabs of the Muslims of the Cape, to teach them. And he wrote the first locally written book, Bayanuddin, and it was published by the Ottoman Empire. Being able to write and speak the local Muslim language enabled him to explain to them the Quran and the meaning of the Arabic idioms necessary to carry out the basic rules of the religion or the basic practices of the religion. To translate the text and teach these people in their own language the true Islamic religion. The Cape Argus quote. That is a quote from the Cape Argus, the 12th of January. It enabled him to explain to them the Quran and the meaning of the Arabic idioms necessary to carry out the basic rules of the religion, to translate the text and teach them, these people, in their own language, the true Islamic religion, unquote. To Cape August, 12th of January, 1870. The Sheikh married Ruqiyya Maker on the 8th of April, 1863, 2 years after his arrival. She was 18 and he was 48 years old at the time. The Sheikh stayed in Wales Street, now the Bakr Museum, and the Hanafi and a Hanafi Islamic school was established at the corner of Wales and Bree Street. Not many attended the school because the majority of the people of the Cape were Shafi'i school of thought. Now, that particular place is so sad. It's still on the corner of Wales Street and Bree Street, but it's actually a strip place, a striptease place for women. It's a red light kind of a double-story building, which is so sad. It's not owned by Muslims anymore. Obviously, it was sold and over the period of time. The actual house surveys. I had an opportunity to speak to one of the descendants, or actually like one of the children who stayed in that house. He's very old now. And he gives descendants of the people who stayed in it, and he explains how the city council actually robbed them of the place by force, by getting them to sign a document which they couldn't read, and then took the property away from them. So you can see that there was an advantage in not being able to read, but because we could maintain our culture and our religion. But it's always a disadvantage when it came to contracts, because they would have these fancy languages which we can't understand. And then, the kind of the smooth talking and getting our people to sign. So that was a negativity part of the Muslim history in the Cape. But be that as it may, it didn't stop the Muslims from moving forward, because their future is always that Allah provides. Doesn't matter what you do, you steal from us, Allah will take it away from you again at some other time, and you stand your own man on the day of judgment. So you just basically, they've got this terminology in the Quran. You say inna ilayhi raji'un. Everything comes from Allah and everything goes back to Allah. So that is a kind of a mantra that keeps people sane. They don't freak out about it. There's also another feature in Allah, in the Quran, where Allah Ta'ala tells us that أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Allah says, على إن أولياء, upon his friends, Allah's friends, friends of Allah, لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. They do not fear nor do they grieve about anything. That is like real freedom, subhanallah. So the Cape Muslims, due to the lack of doctrinal aspects of Islam, did not realize that there was orthodoxy in both schools of thought. They didn't actually realize that it's still acceptable. So if the British government and Rubo first consulted the Cape Muslims, they would have known the existence of different schools of thought and Islamic practice. The official appointment of Sheikh Sheikh Abu Bakr Effendi was due to the Treaty of Paris between the British and the Ottoman Empire or Sultanate, in which an agreement was signed to protect each other's subjects. I'm repeating myself here to make a point here, in colonies or land ruled by the other. In other words, to express tolerance for each other's governance and in such way support each other's interests. That is important, that they respect one another's governance and in such a way support each other's interests. And so this is also part of the treaty, also part of the Islamic rule. If there's peace, don't disturb it. And if you need to protect your home and your people, then do so. The young Sultan of Turkey at the time, Sultan Abdul Hamid II, crowned in 1876, saw the emergence of young supporters who wanted their Sultan to serve as supreme Islamic guide for the Muslims all over the world. The British wanted a happy Muslim craft class to serve their Western needs, there you go, in the Cape, and hence were prepared to arrange for special services from the Turkish Empire for the Cape Muslims. Another point that would says to you that these people were always respected and kept free because they needed the craftsmen and craftswomen of the Muslims. His salary, this is the reason behind the coming of Sheikh Effendi. His salary was paid by the Ottoman Empire, and it was the dispute at the Palm Tree Mosque that encouraged the Haji Maiden to request a spiritual guide directly from the east. The Cape leadership conflicts and the request for an outside spiritual guide was understandable in the context where the old forms of social organizations were becoming inadequate to cope with the enlarged and diverse members of the Cape Muslim community. The Cape Muslim leadership of the time lacked the authority and charisma that their predecessors enjoyed. So we understand that. I mean, Professor Adam presents a very good argument in this presentation about the change in leadership as the community becomes diversified, and how the smaller group of people had more respect for their leaders, and as they, as things advance, etc., they had a kind of a lack of respect or lack of kind of support from one another. So that is inevitable when a group of people in actual fact increases and the public increases. Right. There was thus an uncertainty with regard to the competency of the doctrinal matters in the Islamic faith at the time. The conversions and intermarriages among Muslims in the Cape brought with it the introduction of many foreign traditions and practices in the new Cape Muslim heterogeneous group of people. The term Malay could no longer identify this group of Cape Muslims. Once Islamic symbols and themes were firmly established, even the ulama, the theologians, came to accept local practices as part of the broader Islamic picture. The resulting social structures became part of the community, and conservative Muslims sought to preserve them. However, since some local practices were clearly compromised, fundamentalist movements would sometimes arise to purify the religious life of the community. This is in Volume 1 of Islam, Continuity and Change in the Modern World, that was published in 1982. The public nuisance of the Ratib, the sword-wielding Khalifa displays, carried a major weight from the House of Assembly to veto and have Sheikh Effendi come to the Cape. There was no reservation. Mr. Jarvis believed that the Cape Muslims would become more troublesome if a foreign leader would preside over them. There was one particular dissented. There was no precedent to go by to help the judgment. The empire in London was consulted. The government support for Islamic education was not in the Victorian era as enthusiastically forthcoming as Christian education. The eventual coming of and service of Sheikh Abu Bakr Effendi with imperial permission was the first in the Cape, against many odds, a blessing for the Cape Muslims. Alhamdulillah. A precedent was established when Muslim subjects of the British monarch were deemed the legitimate concern of the Turkish Sultan, who was also in international conventions recognized as the spiritual leader of the universal community of Muslims. And the Ottoman Empire was very powerful. The coming of the Sheikh also saw a clear distinction drawn between political and religious interests of the Cape Muslims in the stipulations of the Turkish teachers' spheres of concern, in their secular interests as British subjects and cultural interests as part of the world community of Muslims. The Cape Muslims community's distance away from Turkey gave the Cape colonialists the assurance that everything will be in order for Sheikh Abu Bakr Effendi's residency and position in the Cape. The Sheikh's mastery of the Cape language allowed him to reach the Muslims through the Cape Dutch Afrikaans or Arab or Afrikaans Arab or Kaaps. The Hanafi Islamic school of thought, the Sheikh purported, caused disagreement and strife amongst the Cape Muslims, who were predominantly from the Shafi'i school of Islamic thought. That's Imam Shafi and Imam Abu Hanifa, the Hanafi school of thought, and Imam Shafi is a school of Shafi'i school of thought. Islamic thought of the day did not as yet realize that the various schools of thought in Islam are recognized in Orthodox Islam. Mia Brandel Serir, that is the reference of that particular research. What was understood was that the Cape Muslims were following a pattern of psychosocial minority complex, cut off from the mainstream of the main Muslim lands. They were unable to fully participate in their own culture and were debarred as Muslims from participating fully in the prevalent Western culture and of their new homeland. The limited knowledge of holding on to what they know tended to work destructively within the larger community. Does any new school of thought or innovation increase sensitivity amongst them? Sheikh Effendi was brought to somewhat solve this dilemma, but inadvertently increased the polarization to a community weary of change. Sheikh Abu Bakr was a harbinger of both a blessing of uniformity with the Sultan's followers and a curse to the local conservative elements in the new Cape Muslim community. Factional strife did not die out, but was exacerbated. Clearly, as arbiter, whatever esteem the Sheikh enjoyed was more because of whom he represented than his own skill at arbitration. Okay, so it's difficult when he starts saying something and it's a Hanafi school of thought, and the Safis are not going to accept it, and etc. etc. In due course, Abu Bakr's stay signaled failure in unifying the Cape Muslims by doctrinal conformity. You can see that the Muslims have got this fighting spirit in terms of nobody tells me what to do. I have got the Quran and I'm going to follow the Quran, and I will take you as a leader whenever it suits me in terms of, but otherwise I'll make up my own mind. So it is like a kind of a freedom and a kind of a community acceptance. So it's a kind of a it's not easy for the Westerner to deal with a situation like that, because they're used to people obeying. Everybody obeys the leader, in the Christian space, in the government features, you must obey, And whereas a Muslim is a free spirit, under the rule of God only. In the due course, Abu Bakr's stay signaled a failure. Okay, like the short-sightedness of the British and Ottoman Empire regarding the needs of the Cape Muslims made the Sheikh increasingly unpopular at the Cape. I'm at 37, so I'm going to stop here because now we're going to page 22, and it's the Cape Muslims. Okay. Because sometimes people don't like to listen too long and get tired. So, okay, 30 minutes, 37 minutes. I'm ending off here. Shukran for your viewing. Please send it on to other people. And if you have any comments, please don't hesitate to comment. I will try and answer any comments that are there. And even if you differ with me, as long as you are courteous about it, I will welcome such comments. It is extremely interesting. I'm sure you have not, in actual fact, thought of many of the things that is coming through, and we thank Allah for having given Professor Adam the ability to write and research this particular very original piece of work, and to reinterpret the features around the Cape Muslims, and actually in many ways debunk some of the colonial stories about the Muslims. So it's very interesting and very needed. May Allah guide us, inshallah, and keep us on the straight path, inshallah, and grant us the opportunity to pass away as Muslims, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.